So thankfully to Mike, he kept going on with the book of Acts while we were gone. So we just fell right in flawlessly to Acts 25. It works out perfect. It's like he knew what he was doing. So it was great. Thank you very, very much. Today we're going to be in Acts chapter 25. And I won't lie, reading Acts chapter 25 for the first couple of times, it was kind of difficult to pull anything like, really, what can we say for this? But in reading and prayer and meditation, it came to me. So if we recall, in Acts chapter 21, Paul goes to Jerusalem against the wishes of the people who love him, and he ends up getting arrested. And from that point in Acts chapter 21 all the way to Acts chapter 25, he's been defending himself against these foolish charges that have come against him. In Acts chapter 24, verses 5 through 6, it says, "We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and he tried to desecrate the temple. So we seized him." So they're going before Felix now, and they're saying, look, this guy is a troublemaker. He's going all over the world just to cause trouble. And he started this new sect. He's one of the ringleaders, a religion that you don't recognize. The Romans don't recognize it. And they're trying to gain favor from Rome to go against Paul, but for some reason it's not really completely working, right? And eventually, at the end of Acts 24, this corrupt politician Felix ends up being replaced. And in Acts 24, verse 27, it says, "When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison." So as he was leaving, he could have said, well, it's been 2 years, nothing has come of this, you can go. But because he wanted the Jews to like him, he said, we'll just leave this guy rotting in prison. Right? And then this is where we get to our reading in Acts chapter 25. We're going to be in verses 1 through 12 today. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up to from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held in Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if this man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." After spending 8 to 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day, he convened court and he ordered Paul to be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. "I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law, or against the temple, or against Caesar." Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Paul answered, "I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." After Festus conferred with his council, he declared, "You have appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you will go." So here we have Paul getting ready to face the same religious men who have been trying to get him busted for the past 2 years. He's facing the same charges, the same false lies that are coming up against him, and he's dealing with these people who just don't like him. They don't like what he's preaching. They want him gone. And in the world we live in, we have to deal with this all the time. We have to deal with people who really just don't like us, or just don't want us around, or just don't like what we're preaching, or just don't like what we're doing, right? We see this in the daily lives of people who are not saved, and we also see it in the lives of Christians, right? Sadly, we see it in the lives of Christians. They put on their church clothes and their church perfume and their church face and their church attitude to hide their angers, their frustrations, their annoyances, their self-righteousness, their condescending attitudes, their snide remarks, and a slew of other bad character traits. But the closer that we get to them, the more time we spend around them, when the pressure is on, when the heat is turned up, or when they simply don't get their way, those traits begin to materialize. And sometimes it's hard to know who the real person is. Sometimes it's hard to know the person that we're seeing at church, is that the real person? Or the person who has to trudge through the world and deal with the evils of this world, is that the real person, right? The person who gets frustrated, the person who gets angry. Which one is the real one? Sometimes it's hard to discern. Take me, for example. The person I am on Sundays when I'm preaching and the person I am during the Bible studies is the person that I want so badly to be every minute of every day. But the real world of it is I'm not, right? I have frustrations. I have angers. I get sad. I get depressed. I get angry at people and at things and at situations. Things get frustrating in the world that we live in. And the reality is the devil is so good at what he does. He knows my weaknesses. He knows my faults. He knows my flaws. He knows which temptations may have a better chance of getting me and which ones won't. Me, like all of you, are fighting spiritual battles, and we're fighting against our own flesh on a daily basis. Not to mention the fact that we have to deal with human beings who are fighting their own battles, right? We have to deal with people who get angry, who get frustrated, who get worried. There's always something going on that we have to deal with, and we can't always be that perfect church person that everybody gets to see on Sundays, right? Sometimes we get angry, sometimes we get frustrated, but I take comfort in my wife's favorite verse, Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And that's all we can do in our lives, right? When we're dealing with the world, what we can do is we can be strong. We can be courageous. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be discouraged when things go wrong or when we're hurting or we're losing something or when we're thinking about what could have been, right? We don't have to be discouraged about those things. Why? Because God is with us. God is always with us. And this is what Paul knew. And this is what Paul held on to with all of his might, which probably prompted him to write to the church in Philippi in Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 7, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Paul going through all of this stuff, knowing that people were trying to kill him and trying to get rid of him, and he was on his way to Jerusalem, and he figures this is the end. I finally finished my race, right? And Jesus comes to him and goes, I need you to go to Rome too. You know, he's dealing with all of these situations he's having to deal with, but he's still able to say, don't be anxious. Don't be scared. Don't be worried. Don't be frustrated. In everything you're dealing with, take it to God, and he'll give you peace. Paul was being attacked by lies, and people were plotting to kill him. He was locked in prison, and really, he knows that any day now he's going to die for his faith. Any day now he's dead, right? And the real world of it is no matter how strong or how faithful we are, death scares us all, right? The end scares us all. Nobody really wants to die. And Paul was coming to his end, and he knew it, right? But he's still able to say, don't be anxious. Don't be stressed. Don't be worried. And he never loses control. He never starts screaming and starts yelling and starts punching people and tries to run away. He never loses control. In Acts 25, 10 through 11, it says, Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court where I ought to be tried. I have not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything that deserves death, I don't refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. As this trial kept moving forward, as they kept bringing false charges, as they kept doing this, and it gets all the way into Festus's time in charge, and Festus could see what was going on, and he decides that he wants to gain a little bit of favor with the Jews. So he reverses his first thing that he tells the Jews, hey, we're going up to Caesarea to judge him. You can do it there. He reverses it and he says, hey, Paul, do you want to go to Jerusalem? Would you like to go to Jerusalem and do the trial there? And it was becoming more and more obvious to Paul that he was not going to get a fair trial in Jerusalem. And he probably figured he wouldn't even make it there alive. So he did what any Roman would do, any Roman who was being treated unfairly would do. He appealed his case to Caesar. He said, I don't care about what you guys have to say. I want to go to Caesar. Now, as we look at this, as we look at it from the outside, we might think of Paul being a very smart man, very wise. He knew how to use his Roman citizenship to get what he needed. And he knew how to stay alive just a little bit longer. But the reality was, this whole thing is a picture of God sovereignly working to get Paul to Rome. It was God working to get Paul where he wanted Paul to be. God can and will use frustrating people, scary places, annoying things, and unfortunate events to get us where we need to be. He will use all of those things that frustrate us and annoy us and make us sick and make us angry. He will use all that to work everything out according to his plans and his purposes for our lives. The verse that I was just reminded recently that we always use, and hopefully by the time we're done using it, you guys will have memorized it. Romans 8:28, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. No matter what we're going through, God's going to use it for good. Not all things are going to be good. That's the sad life of Christianity today, as some Christians believe, once I become a Christian, all things are going to be good. Not all things are going to be good, but they will be worked together for the good of those who are called according to God's purposes. In Paul's case here in Acts, God uses these frustrating circumstances to get Paul to Rome and to preach the gospel in front of very influential people. Now, if we're going to understand what is going on in this chapter and the preceding chapters, if we're really going to understand what's happening, we have to read it in the light of two important situations that happened in Paul's life. The first one is after Paul is blinded on the road to Damascus and Ananias is sent to heal him, God tells Ananias in Acts 9:15, but the Lord said to Ananias, go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles, their kings, and the people of Israel. So he's saying this guy is going to preach the gospel to all of these people, which means Paul wasn't going to die until after he preached to the Gentile kings, right? To the Romans, to Caesar. He wasn't going to die until after everything God said he was going to do was going to happen. The second is the night after Paul was attacked, and he makes his statement about the resurrection, and the Sanhedrin gets angry and they start fighting with each other. In Acts 23:11, it says, the following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify in Rome. So, Paul is converted to Christianity. He travels all over the place preaching Christ to the Jews and the Gentiles. And here, when he thinks his time has come to an end, Jesus shows up. It says, the Lord stood near Paul. And he says, you've come this far. I need you to go just a little bit further. I need you to do something else. So there's a few things that we can learn from what's going on here. One, the devil will attack you when you're living and working for God. If the devil is attacking you, you're doing something right. If the devil leaves you alone, you're doing something wrong. The devil will attack you in your walk and in your ministry. It's just part and parcel of being a Christian who is working for God. The devil brings up two enemies here against Paul in this situation. The first one are the Jewish people who are out for blood. First one, the devil brings up these men who want to kill him. They want to ambush him and kill him. They don't care about a fair trial. They're lying about him, and they just want to see blood. They want him dead. In Acts 25:3, it says, they requested Festus as a favor to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. So the devil is trying to circumvent God's plans, right? In our lives as Christians, the devil knows that he can't unsave us, right? We're already saved. But if he can slow down our work for God, if he can stop us from preaching the gospel to people, then he's going to feel like he's won a little something, right? Because he can't take our salvation away, but he can slow us down. He can stop us from spreading the good news of salvation. And that's really what his goal is. I'm going to try to stop you from doing what God has called you to do. The second enemy that the devil brings up is one that people really don't agree that he could be an enemy or not. And it's Festus. People might argue that he was kind and he was helping Paul. And he was a very good ruler. History says he was a good ruler. But he was really out to gain the favor of the Jews in changing his first ruling to try to send Paul to Jerusalem. Acts 25 verse 9 says, Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up there and stand trial before me there on these charges? Whether he knew it or not, whether Festus understood what he was doing or not, he would have been setting Paul up for failure. He would have been setting Paul up to die. So the devil was using someone who probably didn't realize what he was doing to get Paul to leave and go and get killed. What saved Paul was his bringing up the fact, I'm a Roman and I want to go see Caesar. That's what saved Paul. The devil is very good at using people around us, even the religious types, to make us question our faith and our calling, and even sometimes turn us from it. In the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah prayed to God, asking for his help in getting back to Jerusalem to help rebuild the wall. And Artaxerxes, the king at the time, gives him safe passage back to Jerusalem. And when he's there rebuilding the wall, he runs into resistance. People don't want him doing it. People want to try to kill him. They want to stop him from rebuilding Jerusalem. They don't want him to succeed at the work he's doing for God. They were trying to get Nehemiah to come out to them so they could ambush him. And they were making up lies about him, and they were saying he was trying to become the new king. And they were saying he was trying to rebuild the city so he can fight Xerxes, right? They were saying that he was trying to revolt against the current king. Nehemiah, like Paul, simply said, you guys are liars. You're lying. In Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 8, it says, I sent him this reply. Nothing like that, nothing like what you're saying is happening. You're just making it up out of your head. I like that, right? When somebody comes at you with something, you go, look, dude, you're a liar. Really, it's coming from here. It's not really happening. And he had the courage to go, what you're saying about me is a lie, right? And this is what Paul is saying. This is what Paul's got going on. He's fighting battles spiritually and against people, yet he's still able to stand up and go, look, if I've done something wrong, worthy of death, I'm good to die for it. But I haven't, because every one of you is a liar. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 12, it says, Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Put on the full armor of God. Always have God protecting you when you're dealing with the world, because the devil could be anywhere, in anything, coming after you. Always be prepared and know that you are in that fight. Thankfully, thank God, there is no enemy that has a chance against us when God is working. When God is working, there is no enemy that has a chance against us. Not even the Jewish self-righteous Pharisees of yesterday or the Christian Pharisees of today. Not even the well-meaning, albeit Festus of yesterday or the Festuses of today. None of them can go against us if God is working in our lives. The second thing we can learn from this is God works. He works in our lives. He works in our ministry. He works in our churches, often behind the scenes, and we don't even realize it. But he works to protect us and keep us comfortable and use us according to his purposes, not our own, but his purposes. Throughout Paul's ministry, we have seen God at work, protecting him as he follows God's calling on his life. In Acts 25, we get to see it again, but in this case, it's not as blatant as it was before. It's more of a covert setting up people and things behind the scenes to accomplish his goal in spreading the gospel. From our point of view, reading this about 2,000 years later, all of these events could have seemed like crazy mishaps for Paul, just bad luck, right? His gift for the church in Jerusalem didn't go as hoped. Their plan to go to the temple and go through purification rites so that Paul looked more like a follower of the law backfired and caused a riot, and it led to his arrest. His interviews with Felix didn't convert Felix or even get him released from prison. And now Festus, he has a misguided suggestion that forces Paul to say that he wants to be judged in Caesar's court and he's not going anywhere else. And this keeps him locked in prison still. And now for my two most favorite words, but God. But God. In Acts 23, God used Paul's nephew to save Paul's life and get him safely to Caesarea. In Acts 24, he used the greedy Festus to keep the Jews away from him for 2 years, giving Paul time to influence the Christians. And now he sets up an opportunity for Paul to preach to Festus, Agrippa, and Bernice, which we'll talk about next week. God even gives him an all-expense-paid trip to Rome, right? He even gets him to Rome. From God's position, he was working all things together for good according to his purpose. Remembering those two verses that I talked about earlier, Acts 9:15 and Acts 23:11, God was fulfilling what he told Paul through Ananias and Jesus. He would proclaim God's name before the Gentiles, their kings, and the Jewish people. God was working to get Paul to Rome, where many people, including Caesar himself, would get an opportunity to hear the gospel. But how does that apply to our lives today? If we read Acts 25 from the perspective of human beings, we might get discouraged. We might get upset as we witness all of the frustrating circumstances that Paul has to go through. We might get frustrated knowing that not only religious types of the world, but the unsaved of the world are going to be attacking us. We're always going to be in some sort of battle. It could be frustrating when we read this, but if we read it from God's perspective, as we should, we will see so much more going on. This chapter in Acts and all the others that we've been reading, teaches us to view our circumstances, however frustrating, however confusing, and however annoying they may be, teaches us to view them from God's perspective, not from our own. Our perspective shows Paul in a pretty bad way. He didn't plan what was happening. He was not he wasn't the one on the move to make everything happen. But again, my two favorite words, but God. God was providing Paul with the witnessing opportunity of a lifetime. He was providing him with the opportunity to preach to the most influential people in the world at that time. He was going to preach the gospel to the influential people of Israel and Rome. A lot of times, the greatest opportunity for ministry that God gives us comes wrapped in a package of frustrating and confusing circumstances, where it seems that our goals will never be reached. If we look at our circumstances from a human perspective, we will get angry and we will get frustrated about missed opportunities for ministry. But if we submit to God and His work and His plans for our lives, He can use us in such amazing ways, and He can bring glory to Himself and His sovereign plan for our lives, not our plan. I will close with what King David wrote about God's sovereign protection of His people. Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountain. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He will watch over you, will not slumber. Indeed, He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, and the sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life, and the Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore.